This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
I'm here in the parking lot of Richmond Outreach Center. Richmond Outreach Center is a booming immigrant church here in Richmond, Virginia. They've just opened up this brand new plant, and it's a wonderful place. I've been here on Saturday night worships, and there will be 1,000+ people in a gym, and it has great music and really high energy levels. The kinds of people who attend here are people who are immigrants to Richmond and don't necessarily see other churches where they can fit in as well. I think that's what the global church at the Meeting the Waters needs to anticipate more of in the future, is people flocking to cities from all kinds of countries with all kinds of different backgrounds.
This is a worldwide problem of shifting populations around the world.
How many legal kids with illegal parents are in this country?
So I was apprehensive about even getting involved. I don't want to deal with that. It's not my problem.
Our immigration system is so complicated.
We in the United States right now are operating in an atmosphere of fear.
This is the City Sites Podcast with Larry Kutzler.
John Mayer has been involved in providing valuable information for the church for over 24 years. He is like a George Barna when it comes to getting the right information about culture and about the immigration population now living in all of our neighborhoods. John founded City Vision and has been instrumental in providing Christian leaders with data that is critical for Christian ministries to plan ministry strategies in their cities. John describes his ministry as a unique Christian nonprofit ministry headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota, with the purpose of strategically mobilizing, equipping, and serving the church for kingdom building. John is my guest today as we talk about immigration, the church, and the gospel. Thanks for joining us today for the City Sites Weekly Podcast. John, it's been very interesting over the years as I've watched more and more and more immigrants coming into the Twin Cities. And the problem with it is that the percentage of those immigrants are not Christians. In fact, what is the statistic that you say that most of these immigrants are? What percentage are not Christian?
Yeah, we've been tracking it for over 30 years, and there's over 1 million first and second generation immigrants in the Twin Cities, and about 90% don't go to church. I mean, some might be Christian, but they might work 4 jobs and not have time, but it's kind of a good indicator because a lot of these immigrants, they do have church at multiple times or, to accommodate their work schedules. So 90% don't go to church.
So the problem with that, John, is we take a look at the future. If the churches do not get involved with that 90%, what does the future hold for us?
Well, here's the deal. In 24 years from now, 2043, everyone in Minnesota, everyone in America will all be a minority. So we've never been in this place before. And most of the growth of the population of our country is still immigrants. White people are older, they have less children. And so this has always been the face of our country, is this immigration, but now it's really reached a tipping point where, again, we will all be a minority. So I think if our churches don't start thinking about immigrants, not just, helping them, but actually trying to reach them for the gospel and even planting churches or their church becoming multicultural, their church attendance is going to keep dwindling. And many churches will die in the next 20 years, 25 years, even ones that are strong now, because again, if the demographics shift, it's just there's not going to be enough people attending. And with the generational shift as well, 48% of our population right now is Gen Y or Gen Z. And again, they don't go to church much. So if we're not reaching those two groups, immigrants and the next generations, we're pretty much just kind of waiting to die, in my opinion.
So when you talk to pastors, and you talk to, imagine, enough pastors, your publications reach a lot of folks.
Sure.
What are their reaction? What do they think about this? Because I would think that they don't want to be a part of a sinking ship.
Right.
But yet, John, so many of the churches that we know in our area have nothing to do with the immigrant population.
Yeah, I think they're ill-equipped. They would like to do something. So I think a lot of them, there's different responses. Some ignore it. They just think everything's going to be like tomorrow, or tomorrow's going to be like today, whatever. And they don't do anything, kind of stick their head in the sand and hope something changes. Some are afraid of immigrants. There's a fear factor. Sometimes the media or other, things kind of make us fearful of the immigrant always taking jobs away, and which is not true. They're actually creating jobs. But there's fear. And then some people in our church, not you and I, not many Christians, but there is hate. Some hate Muslims. They hate different people groups. In the past, people hated Jews and Italians or Germans or whatever. So again, these aren't new reactions. They're not healthy reactions. In the Bible, there's many verses about helping the alien, treating them as yourself. I mean, we're commanded to love the alien. It's not an option, it's command. So I think the biblical response is to reach out, be helpful. We're not even supposed to hate our enemies, so we're not supposed to hate anyone. But again, if you're afraid or you ignore it, or you're hateful, you're not going to reach anybody. We have a saying at City Vision, you can't do the prayer, care, share unless you know they're there. You can rap to it too if you want. But how do you pray for people? How do you care for them? How do you share the gospel unless you know they exist? So the first step is kind of having eyes to see, ears to hear, as Jesus said. So looking around your neighborhood, they're often hidden in plain sight, we say. They're there, you just don't always see it, or the trickle becomes a flood over time. I mean, this neighborhood where we're in the studio today, it's changed drastically in the last 20 years. I mean, you've lived here, you've seen the changes. Most of our neighborhoods, I lived in Burnsville 17 years. My neighbor across the street is Somali. Next to them is German. The other side is Cambodian. So I'm the minority. 50% of Burnsville, a suburb, is non-white people, mostly immigrants. So again, the old ideas of suburban, urban are breaking down. And so again, I guess we have to change our paradigm.
And so an angel told Joseph, get your wife and your son and go to Egypt. And so he had to immigrate to Egypt to flee persecution and the threat of death. So be careful how you treat immigrants, because your savior was one.
I would say, John, just from my observation, that so much of the church is ignorant in how to proceed, not only with evangelism, because that, ever since the evangelism explosion back in the 70s, we have not had a real big emphasis. I mean, it's been more on friendship evangelism, which is fine, and probably would work toward the immigrants, yet we're not encouraged to do so. So let me ask you, the mission-sending organizations, which love to do short-term missions trips, why can't we somehow redirect that into short-term missions trips right into our own neighborhoods to reach the immigrants?
Yes. I was just talking to a church this last week about that. I said, they asked me about this, and they went on one of my tours. We've taken 25,000 people on these tours. So they went on a tour, and they asked about this idea. And I said, yeah, if you're going to go to Haiti, then work with a Haitian church here first, get to know them, and then go to Haiti. But then when you come back, and maybe even go together partner with this church, Haitian church or whatever, and go to Haiti, then you come back. Most people don't do anything. That's it. They had their time. And I said, wouldn't that be great if you came back and you actually worked with the Haitian church here and they became a sister church or a partnership? So I think that's key. And immigrants aren't as hard to reach as people think. The two things we don't talk about in public, Larry, what are they in America?
Two things that we don't talk about in public? Oh, it used to be we don't like to talk about politics or religion.
Yes, but guess what? In the immigrant community, every other country except America, that's what they love to talk about. So again, we were taught, don't talk about it. They're not interested. You offend them. But actually, they don't talk to you about it because they don't want to offend you. And so they're very open, and they will talk, and they will ask questions. And in the Bible, they asked Jesus 183 questions. He answered 3 of them. And so we have to learn to dialogue and talk and ask questions. And what do you think? And why do you do this? And And by the way, Jesus asked 307 questions back. So he asked almost twice as many questions back. So I think learning to talk and dialogue is a key in our society. Also, we kind of have this become and then belong. You have to become like us or become a Baptist or a Pentecostal or whatever it is. Then you can belong to our church or our group. But they have more of a belong and then become group thinking in their paradigm. And so again, if you can connect with them, it's very much like the early church. The whole group would, become Christian, the whole household. And so again, that's kind of a belong, become.
So, John, before I get into some of the things I want to ask you about the religion of Islam, you just told me before we started doing the podcast that there's a church you're familiar with, Westwood Church, out in the western part of the suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they have a goal of planting like 10 immigrant churches over the next 10 years.
Actually, 100.
Or 100 churches over the next
10 years, yes.
Now, that's abnormal.
Yes.
I mean, it's abnormal because I have not heard of another church, American church, doing that. Now, they want to plant churches, of course, but not immigrant church. What has changed in that church that they have this kind of direction?
Well, again, they're in Bloomington, and you think, well, Bloomington used to be a white suburb and whatever. Within a mile of their church is 3 African churches, a Chinese church, a mosque, a Hindu temple, all within a mile of their church. And you wouldn't think it doesn't. Again, you don't see it, but it's there. So they see that the demographics have shifted. They have relationships with some of the churches and leaders, and they've already started a Tamil service, East Indian church service with a partner, one of their partners. So again, they don't have all the relationships, but they want to make that a goal, and they want to have some partnerships to do it.
So somehow their leadership had their eyes open. They were seeing what was happening within the Minneapolis St. Paul, or they've been reading you a lot.
Yeah, I think it's a both and thing. So, you've been saying the same stuff for 30 years, but it takes a while. Sometimes it takes, seeing it a different way, hearing it. They have an African guy in their church named Sammy Wanyoni, who's from Kenya. So he's been there a while, and he's an evangelist. And so they've, through that partnership, I think they've gained, some ideas. I think partnerships are key. You and I are both key on collaboration and city movements and things. And so I think the immigrants are going to be great partners, their churches and their ministries. I think part of the reason God brought them here is to help America, help us reach all people. And I think we don't pray very much in our church anymore. And they'll pray all night, or they'll pray, for all people in the neighborhoods, not just their people group. So I think we call it the Great Commission reverse. God's brought these people from all over the world, countries we can't even go to if we want to. And God knows that, and he brings them right here.
John, that's a very interesting observation, but that is so true. I heard a Bible prophecy teacher say something recently that, it sort of caught me a little bit off guard. He said that the last days, God was going to begin to move people from one country to another for that very reason, for they would hear the gospel. Now, I don't know if there's a scripture verse, a chapter or verse for that, but I think it makes sense, least from the standpoint, if they're not going to hear the gospel in their own country as freely as they would in the West, why not move them to the West?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it's God moving people all over, too, like Panama City, Panama, Hispanic place. They have 300,000 Chinese in Panama City, Panama. And so I think God's trying to create this space where immigrants, they need help, and they need someone to help them. The church is a logical piece to that. You mentioned Muslims. They're taught, Americans hate people and this and that and American imperialism. And then they have people, Christian churches resettling them or helping them. And they see, the kindness and they see the fruit of the Spirit. And that's what we want them to see, not us, but, the peace, the joy, the patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, self-control. That's what attracts them to God, not necessarily us as people, but the fruit of the Spirit, the Holy Spirit.
John, if you listen to conservative radio or you listen to certain prophetic teachers, etc., Islam is evil. We're not here to debate that.
Right.
But shouldn't the gospel trump all of that? Because God still loves them. And if we don't provide the gospel message to those that even, because the Bible does teach us even to love those that hate us.
Correct.
So I would think that in our American churches, from our pulpits, we should be talking about reaching them for Christ, not so much about the politics of it.
Correct.
Even the theological underpinnings that so many people have believed that it's a religion of Satan.
Right.
We still need to reach them. Do you believe in that? I mean, do you see that as true?
Politics come and go, and no party has all the answers. There are good things about both parties, actually, or multiple parties. But what's worked for me is treating people like people first, made in the image of God. Also, their honor-shame cultures or their power-fear cultures. Americans, for the most part, are guilt-innocent culture. We like reading Romans, and we get stopped and we say we didn't do it. But in honor-shame culture, and the Bible talks to all three, by the way. So in honor-shame culture, you can bridge into the culture through honoring people, through being kind and hospitality. I use what I call stomach evangelism. Food is a great way to enter a culture. I just read a book called A Meal with Jesus, and it talked about a guy in the UK who reaches out to Pakistanis using food. They just have food, and again, if you get the stomach, you get the person. Jesus was always eating and drinking with people, and they called him a glutton. I mean, because they weren't going to come to the temple. These were tax collectors, prostitutes, people that had shame on them, and Jesus honored them by eating with them. And I find that eating a meal, 80% of the immigrants never get invited to American House, ever. And if you invite them to come over, they will come to honor you. They don't care what your politics are or what your religion is. They will honor you. And Jesus did this all the time. Zacchaeus, I'm coming over for dinner, or Matthew, or whatever. And that works on the culture. And then you just talk about life and you ask questions. And again, it will just kind of take its natural course.
So there's a really strong connection between the two ideas of hospitality and evangelism. In fact, my personal experience has been that where people do hospitality well, they tend to do evangelism well. And where people aren't very hospitable, they don't tend to do evangelism well. It's not that the plane ride home next to the guy that you get to share the gospel with isn't something that's right and good and beautiful. But to, over a period of time, have someone in your home that you're sharing your life with, sharing the gospel with, sharing your good food with, and there's something about hospitality that, if you think about it, like God thinks so highly of hospitality that He actually says that to be an elder in a local congregation, you've got to be hospitable. So that when God's saying the kind of men that I want leading my church, the kind of men that I'm going to use to make my bride healthy, to help in her sanctification, to grow her into the fullness of what God has for her in Christ, they're going to need to be able to show hospitality. And so we see a strong correlation, even if you listen to people's testimonies, in people who are willing to get into their lives and invite them into their lives, and people becoming Christians.
John, you got interested in statistics, you got interested in numbers, you got interested in who's here. You're kind of like a person that observes, and you used your observation skills and talents to put numbers to things. How did you get into that? Because you're a licensed minister. You didn't go into the pulpit in the traditional sense, right, but this is a pulpit in another way. What drew you to the kind of work you're doing today?
I felt called to go to seminary, but not be called to be a pastor in a traditional sense. I really didn't want to work with one church. There's nothing wrong with that, but I really had more of a macro vision. I really wanted to reach a whole city or a whole country or the whole world. And so I knew that one church or one denomination is not going to do that. And so I really looked at the macro. I looked at the gaps. So I thought about the research and, how can we reach people, again, if we don't know they exist? And so trying to create a baseline of information. One time I was recruited to work with the CIA, decided not to go into that. But I've always had the skill set, and I think the information is useful, kind of looking out 10, 20, 30 years ahead, being more proactive than reactive. So the information, a lot of people try to put me as the nerd in the corner, but really the information is a tool. It's to help create strategy to reach different people or different neighborhoods, or even how many churches we need to plant or what groups need them. And so I look at it as strategy and information connected to each other, not just information to sit on the shelf, but active information.
So you call this ministry that you're working with, that you founded actually a number of years ago, 24 years ago or more?
Yep.
And it's called City Vision. It can be found, what's your website?
www.cityvisiontc, like Twin Cities, tc.org.
So if you had a room of pastors that you were addressing, say today, what would you say to them about your work, about who's in their neighborhood, and what would you say to them in terms of how would they go about reaching them?
Again, I think it's micro and macro together. So I think pastors are on the ground. They see what's going on in their neighborhood. They have eyes and ears, but they miss kind of the macro piece. And so I use kind of the analogy of the weather. You know, we all watch the weather report. And so when Hurricane Katrina hit, they can't tell you, is the storm starting or ending, and where's the eye of the storm. So the macro view, the satellite view with the eye of the storm, and we can tell the wind speed and things, it just adds a different frame of reference. So together, they're both reality, but when you put them together, you can actually make better decisions. And so we're not negating what they see, but we're trying to add this other piece that kind of tells the trend, or what is beginning or ending, or what's going on. And so I think these trends together help them kind of see their neighborhood differently. And again, a more proactive way. Most churches budget a 1-year budget cycle. In my opinion, that's very inefficient. They can't really do much in a year. I mean, if 10 Somalis walk in their door on Sunday, it's not in their budget. What do they do? And so I think getting churches to work long-term, think long-term, collaborate long-term, I think is a key. And you and I have been collaborating for many years, and not just with each other, but with many pastors, leaders. And I think it's bore fruit, not because of us, but because we each have a piece to bring to the table. You have a piece, I have a piece, and we come together and God multiplies that. That's what God commands us to do in John 17.
Well, we have seen that in our communities in years past, where churches collaborated, large churches with smaller ethnic churches to reach an ethnic community. And I think that was always a good model, and probably need to go back to that. Because when Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel, I think now it's go into your own neighborhood and preach the gospel, because that faraway place now has come and it's living right next door.
Exactly. I mean, it's just the ends of the earth are here. And I mean, you could do Acts 1:8 all in one neighborhood. We have Phillips neighborhood, the most diverse neighborhood in America, 100 different languages. But not just Phillips is diverse. Every neighborhood probably has 50, 60 languages spoken in every school district. I just went to 3 graduations last weekend. I looked through the program, and, the names of the people, and Russian and Somali and Arabic and, Hmong and, Spanish. And I mean, every school is diverse now. When you and I grew up, it wasn't like that.
It was not.
A few inner city schools, but now every school is a mission field. Every neighborhood is a mission field.
So the paradigm has to change, not only in the church, but in the individual believer as well. We have to see people as God sees them. Is that right?
Absolutely. And I had a unique experience. So I grew up, my next door neighbor was Cuban. My other next door neighbor was Japanese. And I grew up in Richfield, which was very white in the 70s. And we always think we're going to minister to these people. Well, my parents neglected me. They didn't feed me very much. And so every day, the honor shame culture, they didn't shame my parents. They honored me. So every day they brought their leftover food and they gave it to me. And so every day I ate, rice and beans or Japanese food. So God used these people to minister to me. They weren't even Christian. So I tell people God used the ravens to feed Elijah, used the Japanese and Cubans to feed me. I mean, just think about that. So when we think about we're going to minister to them, we're going to get ministered to as well. We have gaps in our theology, or gaps in our prayer, or gaps in our outreach. They're going to show us and teach us things that we need to learn to be a complete Christian.
John, you've been very helpful, and that address again is
cityvisiontc.org.
So again, John, thanks for joining us. I sure appreciate your insights.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday, we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are part of the City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.
This is the City Sites Podcast Network.